Good afternoon. Before we begin this afternoon's proceedings, let me just introduce some of the people that are up before you representing cooperation between federal and state law enforcement agencies. Pat Henry, District Attorney of Suffolk County. Bob Abrams, Attorney General, State of New York. Jim Yelvington, Special Agent in Charge, Criminal Division, New York Office of the FBI. Ray Maria, Office of the Department of Labor, Labor Rep. McDonald, Chief of the Organized Crime Strike Force in the Eastern District of New York. Special Attorney Jerry Bernstein, Assistant District Attorney Ray Germain, who has been cross-designated as an Special Assistant U.S. Attorney in connection with this case. And last but not least, John Slavitsky, Head of the Postal Inspection Services, New York office. And I am Ron DePetris, Chief Assistant United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York, and Acting U.S. Attorney in Ray Deary's absence. To announce a major racketeering indictment involving infiltration of and defrauding of legitimate businesses and labor unions. The 28-count indictment that has been unsealed today charges Michael Franzese and 8 members and associates of what has been denominated as the Franzese Group with being involved in a wide-ranging conspiracy from 1980 to the present, involving a conspiracy to conduct the affairs of the Franzese Group through a pattern of racketeering activity. The indictment also seeks forfeiture from the defendants of approximately $5 million in illegal proceeds obtained from the pattern of fraudulent activity. This indictment is a result of a 3-year investigation by a federal state task force involving extraordinary cooperation between the many law enforcement and prosecutorial offices that are sitting in front of you today. The indictment lists 21 separate criminal schemes that were a part of the pattern of racketeering activity, including the following: a bust-out of the Lynn Mazda automobile dealership on Long Island, in which Franzese and his group defrauded customers and the finance company and fraudulently obtained over $500,000. A bust-out of another automobile dealership on Long Island, Rumplich Chevrolet, in which Franzese and his group obtained approximately another $500,000 in illegal proceeds. Franzese's control of the Allied International Union, as a result of which he and his associates obtained kickbacks in exchange for the investment of the Allied Security, Health, and Welfare Fund's assets, approximately $590,000 in worthless certificates of deposit in a now-defunct offshore insurance company. Fourth, a scheme to defraud the Union Indemnity Insurance Company of New York and the state of New Jersey by fraudulently obtaining a motor fuel sales tax bond to guarantee the payment of motor fuel taxes in the state of New Jersey. As a result of that fraud, the company defaulted on the bond, and Franzese and his group retained over $3 million, which should have been paid to the state as motor fuel taxes. And several additional various credit card, insurance, tax, and other fraudulent schemes, which Ed McDonald will describe to you in detail in a couple of minutes. But first, let me identify the 9 defendants and their roles as alleged in this indictment today, and the roles they're alleged to have played in furthering the affairs of this racketeering enterprise. First, the defendant Michael Franzese is identified as the boss of the Franzese Group and as having directed all of its affairs and having been the president, chief executive officer, and owner of some 18 corporations listed in the indictment as being involved in the activity reflected therein. 2, the defendant Louis Fenza, who is alleged to be a member of the Franzese Group, who served as manager of the Lynn Mazda automobile dealership, which I mentioned before, who operated several gasoline service stations for Franzese, and who served as a business agent, vice president, and president of the Allied International Union and fund manager of the pension fund whose assets were fraudulently invested. 3, the defendant Frank Castagnara, also known as Frankie G., identified as a member of the Franzese Group, who was alleged to have used violence and threats to assist the enterprise in its affairs and also to have operated a gasoline service station for Franzese. 4. The defendant Frank Sestaro, also known as Frankie Body Shop, identified as a member of the Franzese group who served as president of Ireland Auto Inc., an automobile repair shop associated with Lynn Mazda, and who assisted the defendant Michael Franzese in conducting the day-to-day affairs of the enterprise. 5. The defendant Walter Donor, who is identified as serving as president of Rumpling Chevrolet, one of the automobile dealerships that was busted out that I referred to earlier. 6. The defendant Harold Sussman, who was identified as an accountant for the defendant Michael Franzese and various of the Franzese corporations. 7. The defendant Gerard Nocera, who was identified as serving as vice president of the Beneficial Commercial Corporation, the finance company who was defrauded of over $1 million as part of the automobile dealership bust-outs. 8. The defendant Anthony Tommaso, who served as president of the Allied International Union and fund manager of the Allied Security, Health, and Welfare Fund. And finally, number 9, the defendant Mitchell Goldblatt, an attorney, who served as counsel to the Allied Security, Health, and Welfare Fund and the Allied International Union. Most of the defendants have been either arrested or are scheduled to surrender at an arraignment to be held later this afternoon before Judge Mishler in the Uniondale Courthouse out on Long Island. I believe the time is slated to be 2:30. And now let me turn it over to Ed McDonald, who will describe the specific charges contained in this lengthy 28-count indictment. Ed?
First of all, there was one oversight in speaking of the agencies and the people who participated in the investigation. And before I go any further, I'd like to acknowledge the contribution made by representatives of the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance. Commissioner Roderick Chu was scheduled to be here today, but he was unavoidably detained. You sort of messed this up by putting your microphones in the front here. We'll have to do the best we can. Today's indictment is an example of the movement of significant racketeers into sophisticated and complicated business crimes through which they reaped millions of dollars in illegal profits. The Franzese group, the focus of today's indictment, operated their criminal enterprise not through common street crimes, but through fraudulent schemes through which they infiltrated some of this country's most respected and established industries and businesses. They conducted their criminal activities through motion picture production companies, large-scale gasoline distributorships, automobile dealerships, insurance companies, banks, and a powerful labor union. Their impact was profound. They bankrupted businesses, hundreds of people were placed out of work, an important pension and welfare fund was defrauded of hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the defendants earned millions in profits. Their victims included some of the most respected businesses and institutions in this country: the General Motors Corporation, the Mobil Oil Company, Chemical Bank, the Chubb Group of insurance companies, Beneficial Finance Corporation, Mazda Motors of America. And at the same time, while the defendants were plying their sophisticated trades, they did not hesitate, when necessary, to engage in acts of extortion and threats and violence in order to implement their schemes. The indictment charges Michael Franzese as the boss of the Franzese group. It also charges 8 of his associates. These associates include the 2 former presidents of the largest union representing security guards on the East Coast. It charges a prominent labor lawyer, 2 Suffolk County automobile dealers, a CPA, and the operators of several large gasoline distributorships. There are 28 counts in the indictment, and they include a wide variety of charges. But at the heart of the indictment is the Racketeering Act, the charge of the first count of the indictment that charges a violation of the RICO statute. Now, in this count, the defendants are charged with participating or conducting the affairs of the Franzese group through 21 separate illegal acts. It's called a pattern of racketeering activity. And essentially, this pattern of racketeering activity can be broken down into 4 major groups. The first group, or the first series of racketeering acts, concerns the Franzese Group's operation of 2 automobile dealerships in Suffolk County on Long Island, Lynn Mazda and Rumplick Chevrolet. Now, in this series of acts, certain of the defendants, assisted by Gerard Nocera, who was a vice president of the Beneficial Commercial Corporation, which is a subsidiary of Beneficial Finance, several of the defendants, along with Nocera, were able to secure over $2 million in financing for the floor plans of Lynn Mazda and Rumplick Chevrolet. That is, the defendants were able to get money from Beneficial Finance so that they could purchase the cars from the manufacturers, Chevy Motors and Mazda of America. Now, generally, the scheme worked this way. Once Beneficial gave the funding or promised to give the financing to the defendants in their dealerships, the defendants then ordered cars from Mazda and from General Motors, the manufacturers. Beneficial would wire the money for the cars to the manufacturers. The manufacturers, in turn, would send the cars to the defendants at their dealerships. They would send the titles to the automobiles to Beneficial. After the defendants sold the cars, they were supposed to take the money, the proceeds from the sale, and give to Beneficial what they were owed. Beneficial was then to take the title to the cars, give the title to the defendants at the dealerships, and the defendants in turn were to give the titles to the purchasers of the automobiles. The defendants, however, kept the money in many, many cases. Generally, that's what the scheme was. Rather than giving Beneficial, the finance corporation, the money that they were entitled to, they kept the money for themselves. Now, obviously, this would anger the people at Beneficial. So therefore, the defendants had to put off Beneficial. They also had to put off their disgruntled customers and ultimately Mazda and General Motors. And they did this, they put off these people in several ways. First, by payoffs to Mr. Nocera. Second, by issuing fraudulent collateral, by making promises concerning fraudulent collateral. They also engaged in lies, deceit, and where necessary, threats and extortion. Eventually, the defendants in their 2 dealerships went out of business, and when they did, they owed Beneficial over $1 million, which they have never repaid. The second series, The second series of racketeering acts involves the Franzese Group's corrupt relationship with the Allied International Union of Security Guards and its related health and welfare plan. 2 members of the Franzese Group, Anthony Tommaso and Louis Fenza, served as president of the Allied Union. They also were fund managers of the Health and Welfare Fund. The defendant Mitchell Goldblatt, an attorney who lives here in Brooklyn, served as counsel to the union and also counsel to the Health and Welfare Fund. The defendants are charged with embezzling over $500,000 from the assets of the Health and Welfare Fund. In addition, the defendants are charged with engaging in corrupt transactions with Dome Insurance Company, a now defunct insurance company based in the Virgin Islands, which was controlled by a man by the name of Leo Bloom. In return for investing large amounts of fund money with Dome Insurance, the defendants received illegal kickbacks. The kickbacks came in various forms. An unsecured mortgage in the amount of $125,000 to Michael Franzese, an unsecured mortgage in the amount of $185,000 to Anthony Tommaso, thousands of dollars in cash payoffs, and finally, an all-expense-paid trip for 3 of the defendants and all of their families to the Virgin Islands. The next group of predicate acts concerns the involvement of the Franzese Group in the use of counterfeit credit cards. The defendants, Michael Franzese and Frank Castagnaro, participated in this scheme. Essentially what they did was they obtained counterfeit credit cards, that is, phony credit cards that bore the names of legitimate people and legitimate credit card numbers. Castagnaro took these phony credit cards, these counterfeit credit cards, to an accomplice merchant at the Babylon Cove Marina in Babylon, Long Island. Castagnaro also used the credit cards at his own gas stations, which were located on Long Island. Castagnaro and Franzese would use the credit cards to make fictitious purchases of various products. They would obtain cash then from the banks by trading in the credit card slips. The banks would give them cash for these credit card slips. Through this scheme, the 2 defendants earned thousands of dollars. In addition, Castagnaro, aided by the owner of the Babylon Cove Marina, also defrauded the Chubb Insurance Group of over $24,000 by falsely reporting that his boat had been stolen. The final set of racketeering acts. Well, again, we don't want to really. I mean, we've called these people racketeers because that's what we charged them in the indictment. I think that over the last few decades, people who are engaging in racketeering activity have become much more sophisticated, and there is a greater. There's more. This type of activity is more prevalent among criminal types.
Is Mr. Franzese some kind of a business genius?
Well, he's under indictment today. Became involved in the operation of a large gasoline distribution company known as the Houston Holding Company. The defendants then fraudulently induced a company called the Union Indemnity Insurance Company to issue a financial guarantee bond to the state of New Jersey in the amount of $500,000 for Houston Holding's gas excise taxes in New Jersey. Essentially, the defendants tricked the Union Indemnity Company to promise New Jersey that if the defendants could not pay their taxes, Union Indemnity would pay the excise taxes to New Jersey to the tune of $500,000. Well, the defendants at Houston Holding eventually ran up a tax bill, an excise tax bill, of over $3 million in New Jersey. They never paid a cent on it. Union Indemnity was supposed to pay $500,000 according to their guarantee to New Jersey. However, they were unable to do so, and the company is now in receivership. The last and final count in the indictment charges Michael Franzese and 5 of his associates with a massive tax fraud. Essentially, they were charged with defrauding the IRS, the federal government, out of millions of dollars in taxes owed by Franzese, his co-defendants, and their various businesses. The count is a conspiracy count, and it charges 97 overt acts. 57 of the acts involve the outright failure to file personal and corporate tax returns for a period of over 6 years. Among the remaining 40 overt acts are Michael Franzese's receipt of over $1 million from Lawrence Irizzo, proceeds from the gasoline distributorship which Mr. Irizzo ran. In addition, Michael Franzese is charged with illegally transferring $1.5 million in cash into one of the motion picture production companies that he ran. That essentially is a summary of the indictment. Now, other speakers will address themselves to the type of cooperation that we had in this case and to the manner in which the investigation was conducted. Unquestionably, it's been a very, very successful joint investigation. All of the agents and detectives who worked in the case worked tirelessly and in a real spirit of cooperation. However, I would like to particularly praise at this time Jerry Bernstein, the attorney in my office, a special attorney in my office, who, along with Ray Germain from the Suffolk County DA's office, coordinated the investigation. As Ron DePietris mentioned, Ray Germain, who works for Pat Henry, was cross-designated as a Special Assistant United States Attorney. I think it's fair to say that he and Jerry Bernstein worked together in this endeavor as true partners, and we're proud to have Ray Germain as a member of the family of the Brooklyn Strike Force. Thank you.
Pat Henry would now like to address you with a few words. His office, Ray Germain, his detectives put a substantial amount of work and made a major contribution to this case. Pat?
Thank you very much. My remarks will be very brief. I would like to commend the police from my office and certainly Ray Germain, the Assistant District Attorney and Special Assistant United States Attorney, for the efforts that they have made to make this case an indictment possible today. I'm very proud to be a part of it. I commend the U.S. Attorney's Office, and more specifically Ed McDonald, for being an outstanding professional that it's a pleasure to work with and a real privilege to work with. The message, I guess, today is, in a nutshell, that as long as people like the Franzese group are going to conduct their illicit affairs in our community, there'll be people like Ed McDonald and indeed myself around to catch them and hold them responsible for it. Thank you very much.
Bob Abrams' office, the Attorney General of the State of New York, also made.
Well, it's good to see so many prosecutorial agencies and representatives of so many who have worked together to bring about the announcement that's being made here today, and that have been doing this for the better part of the last couple of years. It is significant that local, state, and federal agencies have been working so well in the recent past, and I think today's announcement is a further reflection of that. We in the State Attorney General's office, back in 1982, out of our Long Island office, investigated complaints with respect to the Mazda dealership, the Lynn Mazda dealership. We were beginning to get complaints from consumers that they were not getting their rightful ownership papers, and they were getting ticketed by law enforcement authorities. We investigated the case civilly. We got several $100,000 back in civil restitution for the consumers, and we began a criminal investigation. We then were in touch with the federal authorities and discovered that they had related investigations and turned all information and material over to them and cooperated in a continuing fashion to work with them to develop the case. So we're very proud in the Attorney General's office to have had a relationship with all the authorities who are here today, and look forward.
It's a significant part of the case, and Ray Maria, Deputy Inspector General, U.S. Office of Labor Racketeering, would like to address you for a few moments.
Very briefly, it's going to be accomplished through cooperation. Most of you probably are not aware that the Department of Labor does in fact have a law enforcement function. And in the next few months, certainly in the next few years, I think this will become a more visible function. With regard to the labor charges in the indictment today, that's the area of benefit plan abuse. I'm confident in the coming years you'll see more and more cases in this area. Gentlemen, I thank you and your agents for their cooperation and certainly their contributions.
Thanks, Ray. That completes our presentation to you this morning of the address that. I should note that there is a continuing investigation with respect to the oil and gas aspects of the case. And this indictment only represents a part of a continuing investigation in that regard.
Does that also include a further investigation with the state of Florida?
We have no comment on what the state of Florida may or may not be doing.
Is it my understanding that Liz...
Can you answer
I
one
want to
question?
answer his other question. The question pertained to the amount of influence in the presence of organized crime in the motor fuel industry. I think that this case only can be evaluated in terms of this case. There's no question that we have an investigation. We have a task force involving many law enforcement agencies in the New York metropolitan area that's focusing on organized crime involvement in the motor fuel distribution industry in the New York area. But I think to make any further statements beyond what appears here in the indictment as to the impact or the control or the involvement of organized crime in that industry would really be inappropriate at this point.
Why that business, of all businesses that organized crime could infiltrate? Why that particular industry?
Well, there's a potential for an enormous amount of profit, and that's what we've seen. We've had several indictments, both in the federal level and in the state level. There have been several convictions so far in the motor fuel industry involving organized crime figures and corrupt businessmen. And the profits that were made, as reflected by those cases, were enormous.
What are you talking about? How much?
Well, I think it's just fair to say it's in the millions.
Mr. McDonald, obviously there's been infiltration of other businesses before by organized crime. How does this differ in scope with previous cases?
Well, I don't think we want to comment about how this compares with other cases. I think it's fair to say that this is a substantial case. It's a very significant case. The amount of involvement in legitimate businesses is enormous. The profit that was made by the defendants in this case is substantial, and I don't think it would be fair or appropriate to compare this case with other types of cases where racketeers have infiltrated legitimate businesses.
Mr. McDonald, in recent days, can you give us some kind of perspective on the size of the Franzese organization as opposed to other organizations you've seen?
No, I think we have to look at this. I mean, there are in this indictment, we simply charge 9 people as representative, or as associates or members of the Franzese group.
Have you essentially broken that group up now?
Well, I wouldn't want to make any predictions about what's going to happen. You know, we've simply filed an indictment. An indictment is a charge against people. We still have to convict them and put them in jail.
The charges are true.
If the 9 defendants who are charged in this indictment are convicted and incarcerated, I think that will go a long way towards breaking up the influence and the impact of the Franzese group.
You mentioned Lawrence. You're mentioning the Franzese group. We've heard a lot in recent days about the 5 big organized crime families in New York. Is this a family? If so, is it a sixth organized crime family in New York, or are they part of the network of the five that we've been hearing about?
The indictment in this case does not specifically address that subject, and it would not be appropriate to comment in that regard.
Do the defendants themselves to be members of the mafia or La Cosa Nostra? Do they use that term?
Perhaps you should address any such comments to the defendants.
Does that come up in the wiretaps and the surveillance at all?
We are not prepared to comment any further other than what is reflected in the indictment. It's an organized group. It's denominated as the Franzese group. There are 9 members and associates, and beyond that, we are not prepared to comment.
The indictment is to avoid the term mafia. Is that done purposefully?
No comment.
Does the indictment reflect the extent of Mr. Francese's involvement in the gases business?
As I said before, the investigation is continuing, so we're not prepared to comment.
Mr. Francese's penetration into the gas business?
It's continuing as a whole, and it might be fair to conclude that.
Mr. McDonald, what is Mr. Franzese's precise relationship to Sonny Franzese, if at all?
He is the son of Sonny Franzese, John Sonny Franzese.
Is he a member of the same organized crime family as his father?
Well, I think we're going to rest on the indictment as it stands here. Mr. Franzese has publicly stated that he is not a member of a crime family. I think it would only be fair to say that we have taken a position on this in court, but I think it would be inappropriate at a press conference to go into what our position was.
Hasn't there been a ruling in federal court about Mr. Franzese vis-a-vis organized crime that you could tell us about?
As Mr. McDonald just said, there has been a ruling, but we do not feel it is appropriate to comment at this press conference in connection with this indictment on that subject.
Mr. McDonald, Mr. Franzese is identified as owning motion picture production companies having an interest. What motion pictures, if at all, indeed had obtained in that we might have been aware of?
Well, I don't know what motion pictures you're aware of, but some of the pictures that he has produced are called Mausoleum, Savage Streets, Cry of the City, and I think he has in production now a motion picture that will be called White Slavery.
And, Mr. McDonald, you mentioned the Lawrence Arezzo during your comments, and you said he is now a cooperating witness. Often, investigations like this are hinged on the work of someone on the inside. Is this person critical? Was he critical? And is he under witness protection now?
Well, it's a matter of public record that Lawrence Arezzo is in the witness protection program. His significance in this case, I think, is something that we will not comment on. His name does appear in the indictment, and he is a cooperating witness. That's a matter of public record. But what significance he plays in this case and what role he had in this case beyond what appears in the indictment, I don't think would be fair to comment.
Mr. McDonald, if you won't comment on whether both Franceses are members of the Colombo crime family, can you characterize Michael Francese's significance in organized crime? Describe his stature?
No, I think it would be inappropriate to do that. I think it's fair to say that the charges here at least reflect a conclusion on the part of the Department of Justice and the agencies that investigated this case and the grand jury that Michael Franzese is a racketeer and that he and his associates have engaged in significant criminal activity and that they have an important impact on the economy of the New York metropolitan area.
Why did it take 3 years to get this case completed?
Sometimes it takes a long time to do a good job.
Mr. Francese's attorney, John Jacobs, said that they accused the Department of Justice of conducting a vendetta against his client. He points out that he was indicted and acquitted of charges based on one of the same witnesses in your case, Mr. Irizzo.
Well, Mr. Jacobs will have the opportunity to make whatever type of motions and complaints that he might have in the appropriate forum, and that would be in the courtroom, and we're prepared to address anything concerning the sufficiency and the propriety of this indictment.
Did you arrested Mr. Franzese?
Did you work all 5 of those areas at the same time, or did you work one and then it snowballed into another or rolled into another?
Well, I think I simply, for purposes of clarity, I summarized the racketeering acts and I placed them in 4 groups. There are other activities that make up this indictment. So, I mean, there are 21 separate racketeering acts, and they sort of fell into 4 groups. There are others that you'll see when you look at the indictment, which I didn't summarize, because if we did, we probably would be here for several hours.
What kind of violence was used by these people to keep others in line?
I think the indictment will have to speak for itself on that. We don't want to go beyond what the indictment says.
What sort of bond will you request, Mr. Franzese? Do you have a recommendation on bail?
At this point, we're not prepared to make any comment on that.
Has he been arrested?
How help was the carelessness of the? It seemed to say were they careless? I mean, failure to file personal income tax and failure to pay the beneficiary company. I mean, it seems like how could they not be caught in certain situations? Did that help you out that they were careless?
I think you'd have to draw your own conclusions from what you see in the
Do
indictment.
you have any conclusions as far as that is concerned?
I do, but I'm not prepared to share them with you now.
Will the government move to seize his home in Long
There are forfeiture provisions in the indictment, and I think they'll have to speak for themselves.
How much are you seeking?
The indictment seeks to forfeit over $5 million of illegal proceeds obtained by the Franzese group.
Is that the total that they allegedly got, $5 million?
That's the total ill-gotten gains reflected by this indictment, yes, approximately.
Were Mazda and Rumplick Chevrolet put out of business?
Yes.
Complete?
Yes.
And has Michael Franzese been arrested, or you didn't identify who was arrested and who surrendered?
It's my understanding that he has not yet been arrested. The other, two of the other defendants are surrendering this afternoon at the Uniondale Courthouse.
Is he considered a fugitive?
Let's just say that he is not yet. Technically, to be a fugitive, he would have to have had notice of the indictment, and at this point, we're not prepared to say that he actually has been placed on notice of the indictment. So I think technically it would be unfair to say that he's a fugitive.
Was he the only one of the 9 that will be there?
Yes. Well, he might still be there. I mean, I don't have the information yet because we've been in here now for almost an hour, so there might be new information which I haven't received yet. So I can't tell you for sure he won't be arraigned this afternoon, but when we walked into this room, he had not yet been apprehended.
Mr. Jacobs said he's been begging your office to find out what date to have his client surrender, and that you never accommodated him, and he would have been perfectly happy to have him here today. Do you have any comment?
Well, maybe if you have a relationship with Mr. Jacobs, maybe you can get in touch with him and tell him that we want to see him at 2:30 this afternoon at Uniondale.
I already told him.
Well, if he's so eager to appear...
And what did he say?
He said he would get back to me.
I overlooked one other thing, which I want to bring up now, and that is I neglected to mention the Internal Revenue Service. They played a primary role in this case, and I simply neglected to mention it. They were with us from the very beginning on it. They had many agents working for a period of over 2 years on the case, and it would be unfortunate if they weren't recognized for their important contribution.
And this indictment is pretty complicated, and it seems like each is that his friend when you go after, is it part of the RICO statute approach, or why are we seeing so many overt acts being tried?
I think the policy of the Department of Justice has been, over the last few years, with respect to racketeering activity and organized crime activity, to focus on the involvement of organized crime figures and racketeers in their infiltration of legitimate business and in their control of labor unions. When you get involved in legitimate businesses, the cases tend to become much more complicated, and in pleading an indictment, obviously the indictment is going to be more complicated than, say, a simple street crime.
Ed, was that gun insurance company a shell or a fake company offshore?
No, it was an actual operating insurance company. They had extensive business dealings in the Virgin Islands, and it's a real legitimate company.
Mr. McDonald, you said it was easy. There were big dollars in the gasoline business. Why is that? Is there some laxity in the system, the way that it's collected, or that it makes it easy to do this?
I'm not prepared to criticize or to comment on the manner in which the tax collection system operates, both in the state or the federal level.
How do they do it? Could you explain that briefly?
At this point, I think it would be inappropriate for me to get into that.
There had been changes in the law since the time of the acts reflected in this indictment that will hopefully solve those problems.
Mr. DePietris, as part of your continuing investigation involved political corruption?
We're not commenting as to any aspect of what may be as part of a continuing investigation, one way or the other.
Mr. DePietris, while we're talking about organized crime, can you give us the status of the case against John Gotti right now?
We expect it to go to trial in early 1986. No specific date is set as yet.
Are you confident that the motions to dismiss will not be granted?
Our positions in that regard are set forth in our papers filed in court, but yes, we are confident that it will proceed to trial.
Mr. McDonald, how well did Mobil Oil cooperate in this case?
I think they were completely cooperative, very helpful.
Who owned the Babylon Club Marina? Was that person charged with anything?
No.
But that person sort of acted
He was identified. I identified him when I spoke before as an accomplice merchant.
So he wasn't charged with anything?
He's not been charged, no.
And is Michael Franzese some sort of new breed of mafia leader? It seems like just about everything here is tied to paper trails and phony companies. There doesn't seem to be any kind of strong-arm tactics.
I think you've got a loaded question there, and incorporated in your question is something that we have said we are not going to get into at this conference. If you care to rephrase the question, as we would say in a court, you may.
Is he a new breed of racketeer?
I think you can, you've been around here for a while and you know the types of charges we've been bringing against people who have been labeled racketeers, and you can look at this case and you can compare it to other types of cases and see that it is a bit different. Over the last few years, of course, the department has been bringing cases involving the infiltration of legitimate business and labor racketeering. And it's a reflection of what the policy of the department has been, and also of the FBI and the other federal and state law enforcement agencies, executed in this district as well. But going to court,
If you consider the second tier, is that a useful term to use? Or possible new generation of second tier?
I think if you came over here more often, maybe you see some of those old first-tier people being prosecuted in this district as well. But going to call Mr. Franzese or anybody else a member of the second tier, I don't think would be appropriate at this point.
He might not be a future generation of leadership for some of the older organized crime groups?
Again, you're getting into the areas that we have said we would not comment on, so as many times as you try, we still will not comment.
Is this type of prosecution a changing trend in the way organized crime conducts its business, or in the way the Justice Department is prosecuted? Does she have good chances?
Well, again, we don't want to really. I mean, we've called these people racketeers because that's what we charged them in the indictment. I think that over the last few decades, people who are engaging in racketeering activity have become much more sophisticated, and there is a greater. There's more. This type of activity is more prevalent among criminal types.
Is Mr. Franzese some kind of a business unit?
Well, he's under indictment today.
Well, if that's all, thank you very much for attending.
How do you spell your last name?
B-E.
Yeah.
P-E-T-R-I-S.
What is your title?